So I am at Florida Polytechnic University for firefights, or fights, plural. Hey, I couldn't get the name right at all before, and now I just don't know if it's plural or not. So I'm getting better. Maybe by the end of the day I'll know what I'm at. But anyway, got all 4 robots. They're all up and running. I just got to charge the batteries on F1/3 or swap them out, just because that one, I decided to do a little demo of it at work yesterday. So it needs a charge. But besides that, everything is up and running, and this is not the parking lot I'm supposed to be going to. I'm excited, but also dreading running 4 robots at a one-day event by myself. But the venue looks awesome. It reminds me back to when I held my Bring Your Own Bot event at UCF years and years ago. And that was kind of a fun thing to have in an engineering building. This thing is like an art, sculpture, and engineering building put together, which makes it even cooler. So, time to go fight some robots. This is an event report for firefights held at Florida Polytechnic University on March 17th, 2018. I competed at this event with 4 robots. So going from lightest to heaviest, I had my 150-gram robot Son of Gorgor, brand new robot for this event. I have a slightly revamped F1/3 coming off of its win at Small Bots Mass Destruction. I've got another incarnation of Demon Spawn there in the middle, and behind it, F13 with some upgrades to it. As of this recording, and probably as of the publishing of this video, I have posted build/upgrade reports for Son of Gorgor and F1/3. I did film ones for Demon Spawn and F13. Those will most likely get published sometime in the near future, but I wanted to go ahead and do the event report. Well, I would say while the fights are still fresh in my head, but honestly, running all these robots at the same time, I found myself not remembering like half the fights I had the very next day after the event. Actually, probably at the event, I wasn't even sure when my robots were actually out of the tournament. I had to go and like check the brackets because I wasn't sure what the hell was going on. So I think in my last few videos, I've tried to focus on the fights in order as they happened. It's really just going to be a hell of a lot easier if I do it by robot. So I'm basically just going to follow the order that I uploaded the videos to on YouTube and go from there. So Demon Spawn went into this event slightly similar to it did at Small Bots Mass Destruction. I changed out the front wedge from hinges to a static wedge, and I did swap this guy over to brushless drive at the very last minute, which is going to explain some of what you're about to see. Demon Spawn's very first fight was up against one of those robots that I hate to be drawn up against, Dead End. I don't think I've ever actually managed to beat Dead End with any robot now that I think about it. That robot just keeps getting more and more dangerous every time I go up against it. So as the fight began, I was already having driving issues. The speed controller on my left side wasn't really timed correctly, so I was kind of crab walking right off the bat. We kind of went weapon to weapon a few times, and neither of us was really coming off victorious, and then Dead End just shredded my wedge right off the front of the robot. Hit me again, flipped me over, kept sending me flying, and after some point, something shifted and the belt came off the weapon motor. I was actually able to run inverted with the weapon spinning, which was nice, but once that belt came off, obviously that was all said and done. And then I got to the point where I'm just crab walking upside down, not really able to do anything, and then Dead End hits me, I think from the back, and sends my battery flying out of the chassis. And, well, I tapped out, but I think technically I would have had to tap out no matter what. So there's not really much in the way of visible damage, I think, on the robot. The paint on the top of the robot got all chipped up from things rubbing against it, because it is painted on the inside. The wedge, obviously, is gone. I haven't pulled it out of my box of robot parts. I think I just kind of threw it inside and forgot about it, so I don't have that to show, but I think that was slightly bent. It was a Lexan wedge and a titanium wedge. I think the Lexan wedge was okay. I think the titanium wedge was a little bent. And I don't have the wheel here either, but one of my wheels had about 45% of it taken out from his weapon. So it still kind of worked, but not really. My next fight was up against Knockoff from Team X, and I was able to get up to speed, go across the arena to them. I was driving maybe a little better this time. I'm not really sure why, because I don't think I fixed anything. And it was just kind of a while me trying to get around to something I could hit on them. And I did manage to get a good hit on the side of their wedge and flip them right onto their face, upside down. But that was a little too quick for me, so I did hit them again and right them. so he could continue the fight. But that impact of righting them knocked something loose on my drive again. So I was having just a really dumb time driving. It wouldn't go forward at all, and it would go backwards on one wheel. So I could kind of like inch forward or gyro dance backwards, basically with one wheel up in the air while I flail around the arena. So I wasn't really ever able to get my weapon back to bear. A few times I did flip myself, and then the weapon hit the ground and righted myself. So it was good to know that the weapon is spinning at full speed, I can get back over. And then I got another decent hit in on knockoff, and then I just kind of flailed around the arena for a little bit. The drive issue was really just hindering any opportunity I had to be aggressive in this fight. But fortunately, the initial hit had bent up knockoff's wedge quite a bit, and I think they were having some issues driving as well. At one point, the judges started counting me out because I was gyro dancing on the front of the robot. Basically, it was on the blade going across the floor, but I couldn't get my wheels back on the ground. They started counting me out, which I was a little annoyed with because I was still clearly moving, just not able to get my wheels back down. But eventually the fight came to a close. I was declared the winner by judge's decision, but I just wish I would have been a little more active during that fight because it was just frustrating to try to drive the robot. Demon Spawn's next fight was up against Hyperling, which is basically Herpaderp rebranded for Team X, and I could barely move at this fight. One side of drive was completely off at the beginning of the match, and he came over before I can even get in my starting square and start grinding away on the front of my bot. I was just as twitchy as I'd been in the knockoff fight. I actually hadn't really had any time to repair Demon Spawn in between matches, so Hyperling just kind of kept me in the corner and kept grinding away at my bot. At some point they managed to flip me over, and I think at this point I no longer had the run inverted piece sticking off the top of the robot. That was useful, it worked okay in the fight against Dead End, but I did find that it would make the robot do the thing if it was in the wrong position. So I took it off with the feeling that I'd rather be mobile and not have the disc spinning than to just, possibly get knocked out, but maybe be able to spin the disc. But because of that, I'm stuck upside down with one-wheel drive and no weapon, and there wasn't really a hell of a lot I could do for the rest of the fight except kind of flail around uselessly. So overall, not a lot of damage to Demon Spawn outside of that initial match. Really just needs the motors fixed. Honestly, if I had the time in between matches, I probably would have switched it back over. I had my brush drive set up all ready to go. It would have been just as easy as soldering in 4 wires and plugging it into the receiver, and I could be up and running with it, but I just did not have any time to worry about that during this event. And Demon Spawn, starting off with a loss, kind of put it at the bottom of my priority list. So it was the kind of easiest thing for me to be like, alright, I'm just not going to worry about that robot. And I mean, quite honestly, Demon Spawn hasn't been performing so well at the last few events, some might argue ever. So I just kind of was comfortable with not worrying about Demon Spawn for this event. So next up, we're going to look at F1/3's fights, and its first fight was up against Tetanus, which was a brand new robot, a wedge with a kind of vertical spinner in the middle of it. A design I really like. The builder is fairly new to the game, but keeps building some pretty cool looking little robots. I managed to get underneath him very early on and slam him into the wall weapon first, and unfortunately that knocked out the weapon for the rest of the fight. So then it just became a wedge match, more or less, me pushing him around. He did manage to get under me a few times as well. One problem I was having with F1/3 this time, I love the new machete design. It's based basically off the top of F13's machete. I just traced it onto aluminum and cut it out. But the little serrated edge to it was actually catching on the floor and making it hard for me to drive forward. The robot would drive much faster backwards than it would forwards. So I kind of wasn't able to be quite as aggressive as I wanted to be. But thanks to the way the wedge is hinged on F1/3, I was able to get under him pretty easily most of the time. And I did get a couple smacks in with the machete too. So that was a win by judge's decision. Next up, F1/3 got a rematch against Batter Blaster from Team X. I had fought it previously at Small Bots of Mass Destruction, and during that fight, or I think I even said it in that wrap-up video, I kind of mentioned that I had considered running the robot upside down to use the wedge more like a dustpan. Well, given the opportunity, I decided to go ahead and try that this time. So of course I was having a little trouble driving because my steering was reversed, because I didn't actually change my cables or anything with this strategy. It was kind of a last minute thing I thought of on the way back to the ring. But I was able to get under Batter Blaster fairly well. He fits very, very well inside that scoop. It was basically just perfect size. And even when he didn't go right down the middle, he would kind of ramp up the edges of the UHMW bits. so it worked just as well. So I was able to take him to the wall. The big downside of this I hadn't really thought about was that there is no back to that dustpan. The back is the robot itself, which, granted, I would have just made the back out of the same Home Depot Lexan anyway, but he was hitting directly onto the main chassis of the robot when he'd get all the way into the dustpan, which is kind of a problem. At some point, I managed to get myself stuck under one of the panels of floor. That has been kind of an issue with the Kurtrox Arena lately, but I was able to get myself out, and I think once I was out, Batter Blaster wasn't really moving either. I pushed him off the seam, and he seemed to come back to life as well. So I think both of us were just having issues, but especially because my controls were backwards, I kind of kept trying to go the wrong way when I was stuck under the floor, which was just me being stupid. But I managed to get in, get a couple more scoops on Batter Blaster, push him around. I found with this new machete, I don't know if it's the weight of it or what, but I was actually having trouble hitting the other robot with it. I would end up reversing too much before the machete would come down, so I never really got a lot of good thwacks in. I ended up just fighting more as a wedge, which was pretty lame. And that went down to a judge's decision, and F1/3 took the win. Next up, I was up against the T-Mex 1-pounder that I hadn't had to fight last time, Werewolf, which truly frightens me. That thing has a gigantic spinning blade on it. And if you've seen the video from about a year ago with Neanderthal Roomba, you know how much that could take a robot apart. Granted, Neanderthal Roomba wasn't built very well, but still. So I did run the wedge correctly this time. Due to me being stupid, I kind of blew the box rush that I was trying to do. I just kind of wandered around the arena aimlessly. I'm not even really sure what I was doing, watching the footage again. But I kept just trying to keep that front end pointed at Werewolf and push him around the best I could. I realized pretty early on that if I went head first onto him, his blade was at the perfect height to just kind of go right into my top armor. Very similar to what happened to Neanderthal Roomba. So I tried really to get around the other sides of him. At first I was being a little more cavalier and just trying to go weapon to weapon, as it were. But eventually I just really tried to get around the back of him, push him into the wall, stop the blade. But most of the time he got on top of me, he was still spinning and was able to take some chunks out of my wheels and do some damage to my top armor as well. He also managed to get in some hits on the machete, which ended up bending the machete and putting some nice gouges in it too. Really, in this situation, the only thing you can do with the wedge is just be tenacious and keep going. Eventually, Werewolf ripped away half of the wedge, basically down at the seam in the middle where it's thinned out for the blade to go down. It just ripped it in half. Eventually, the entire thing came off. First, it was just hanging on by a thread, then the whole thing just went flying. So I was left trying to push him with half a wedge and then kind of a UHMW bit, which I was still able to do, which is a heck of a lot harder now. But I was able to get some good slams in on him, make him gyro dance. He lost a wheel at some point, which I think is more his fault than mine. And then he spun around right there at the end, caught the top of the robot, and ended up gutting the entire thing. He basically just grabbed the wires and pulled both speed controllers and the receiver right out of the robot and shot him across the arena. It was under 10 seconds to go. They were already counting down the end of the fight. And when it happened, the judges tried to call it a knockout. So I kind of argued with them for a little bit, told them it needed to be a judge's decision because the match was under 10 seconds left, and I guess they agreed, but then without deliberating at all, they gave the win to Werewolf. I can't say I don't think Werewolf won, but I think it was a little closer than to give an immediate answer in that situation. But maybe that's just me. It was a good fight though. Werewolf did some great damage. As you can see here, the top plate is missing, obviously. I did put it back on, but it was off. It was gone in that match. So I had to go and solder in brand new tiny ESCs, which I had extra as brand new receiver. And basically, the robot as you see here, if you ignore everything down, that was pretty much what was in the robot after the fight. So lacking a lot of critical parts. As I mentioned, the wedge is cut right down the middle. You can see the nice gouge here. This is about where it connected. So I took that bit of the wedge out, took it off this side of the UHMW. The wheels, I think most of these cuts are from Werewolf, so they are really cut up. But hey, they are flip-flops. They're cheap to replace, which is my favorite thing about using them. And then you can see the blade. I think I did straighten the blade a little bit, but it is definitely bent, and it does have some nice little gouges put throughout it. Actually, it looks pretty cool now that it's all torn up, but yeah, that was a painful, painful fight. But fortunately, F1/3 had done well enough in the winner's bracket that I was now basically guaranteed third place, and the next fight was up against Atomic Wedgie. No, not the super heavyweight. Atomic Wedgie, the FingerTech kit bot. Yeah, that one. So as that fight started, I realized I'd plugged my cables into the receiver backwards, and now the robot was turning the wrong direction with the stick. So I spent the first couple seconds of the fight just kind of wandering around aimlessly, going the wrong way, trying to hit Atomic Wedgie. Fortunately, his weapon wasn't spinning at the very beginning, so I was able to try to get in there and hit him a bit, but unfortunately, I was just having way too much trouble getting used to the controls and just doing a horrible job of going at him. Eventually, the weapon did get up to speed, and I hadn't managed to really do anything useful leading up to that, and then he was able to just bring that weapon to bear and get some really good hits in on F1/3. Basically, my goal in this fight was just to put him into the walls as best I could, and I did okay. For only having half a wedge and driving backwards, basically, I think I did alright, but he definitely was doing some damage with that weapon, and every time I'd go head-to-head with him and that weapon would go right to where I'd soldered in all those electronics recently, I just got really nervous. I pretty much would back off if I went head-to-head with him and just only try to push him if I was getting around to his side or behind him. I did get him into the walls a few times, let off some nice sparks, but besides some good box rushes, I never really got significant control over Atomic Wedgie. He always kind of managed to slip out of my grasp or be in a position where I couldn't push him very effectively. I did manage to get one good wall push back in at the very end of the match. I was kind of hoping if I could do that, the judges would have that as the last thing in their mind and maybe give me the fight, but I went to a judge's decision. I'm inclined to think it was a pretty close decision because I felt it would have been close. But it went to Atomic Wedgie, and Atomic Wedgie did go on, I believe, to win the whole Antweight division. So that was pretty cool. Skipping ahead a bit, I got F1/3 ready to go for the Antweight Rumble. Actually, who am I kidding? I didn't get it ready to go. I just put it in the Antweight Rumble. I didn't charge the batteries. I don't think I charged the batteries before the fight with Atomic Wedgie either. I just, once again, had no time with 4 robots. And in the Rumble, I went immediately after Batter Blaster, which didn't really go too well. I just ended up getting pushed around. The Rumble was like really long for this match. It was about 6.5 minutes, I think, before they called it. So it was just a lot of robots slamming around. It also wasn't really an Antweight Rumble. It was a bunch of Antweights, a couple of UK Ants, and then 2 Beetles. I mean, one was dead end without his weapon, but the other, I think, was like a full-on Beetle. So it was kind of a unique situation. But I don't think I even fixed the driving issues on F1/3, so I was still driving backwards. I was able to scoop some robots up and push them around a bit, but more or less it was just kind of chaos. Usually I feel when you're doing a Rumble, you get to a point that doesn't take too long normally, where it's like, okay, if I just hold on like another couple minutes, I might win this thing. But the robots just kept going in this fight, and then the more they got beat up, the more they seemed to work. Like, they would just kind of come to life again, or better than they were before. I don't know what was going on, but it was just a very strange Rumble. Then eventually, I guess Tetanus decided it wanted to get its revenge on me, and just got in a really nice hit right near the switch on F1/3, and actually just completely disconnected everything from the switch with that impact, and left me dead on the floor for the rest of the match. So next up, we'll look at my new 150-gram robot. I'll always call it a UK Ant because that's what I've learned to call these things back when I started building them. Son of Gorgor, basically a dustpan with a Godzilla jaw on top. I love this thing. I had so much fun building it. I had so much fun showing it off to people. I was just really excited about this bot. Son of Gorgor got a bye round 1, and then its round 2 match, I guess technically, was up against little wedge bot, and that fight went pretty well for Son of Gorgor. Neon Knight kind of fit into the mouth fairly well, and I was able to clamp onto him several times throughout the match. At some point, Neon Knight did manage to remove the side of the jaw, but since it's just glued on foam and not really super necessary to the functionality of the robot, I wasn't too worried about it. I did find that, like with F1/3, I was having a lot of trouble with these seams in the arena. I was getting little dustpan jaw caught on them. It's very thin aluminum that's been sharpened down quite a bit, so both of us were having trouble just getting stuck on those seams. But I was able to get some nice clamps in on Neon Knight. I found that when I was clamped down on him, I wasn't really able to move all that well, especially if I still had one of his wheels on the floor, which was kind of almost always. But at least if I was able to stop him from moving for a bit, I had the control. And that fight came down to a judge's decision and was given to Son of Gorgor. Next up, in my long overdue rematch against the Team Toxic robot, because I haven't had a chance to fight him in forever, I was going up against Nanotoxin. Now, the irony here being that Neon Knight is based off of a kit that Nasir sells, which is what Nanotoxin is. It's basically the showroom display model of that kit. So I kind of knew how this fight was going to go. I kind of already had the match before, but Nanotoxin is so well driven. Not that Neon Knight isn't, but Nanotoxin is really hard to go up against. I've fought him enough times to know it's never an easy match, no matter what. And I think he had something a little extra with his wedge as well. I was able to get under Son of Gorgor pretty consistently. We actually tested after the match and found that our wedges were almost equally sharp. If you put the robots head to head, it was kind of a coin toss between who would go under the other. But I was able to get under him a few times and clamp him. I think we counted a total of 5 clamps that I got on him. Somebody pointed out to me after the fight that I really should have held on to him a little longer. I had control over him when I had my jaw down, and well, I think I could hold him for at least 10 seconds or something like that. I'm not even sure what the Spark rules say about that, but I know I could hold on to him longer than I was, so maybe next time I'll just have to be a little smarter with that. The problem is when you're driving robots, or at least when I'm driving robots, a second can feel like 20 minutes, so I never really know how long I've been holding on to something. I guess it's just to let the ref tell you when to let go. But at one point we did manage to get stuck against the wall. I think he was stuck on the seam, and then I was stuck on top of him. We managed to get them loose without having to go into the arena. We were able to resume the fight, but once the fight resumed, I was kind of a mess. I don't know what happened in that little bit of time that we were stuck together, but I just was not able to get anything going for the last remaining seconds of the match. There wasn't really much to go at that point, probably only about 20 seconds. I just was not able to get under Nanotoxin at all after that, and just got pushed around. I'm told it was a pretty close judge's decision, but Son of Gorgor did lose by judge's decision. Next up, Son of Gorgor was going against Venom, or his driver decided to call him the orthodontist for this fight, which is exactly what I wanted because I designed Son of Gorgor to lose teeth. Because of the seams in the arena, we actually started on just one side of the arena instead of going fully across corner to corner, and Venom's wedge was just able to very consistently get under Son of Gorgor, and his spinning blade ripped off one whole side of the jaw, and then ripped off all but one tooth on the other side. I was never able to get a clamp on Venom. He just constantly got under me. And then at some point, he started bending up the aluminum wedge. Being so thin, it just really isn't very structurally sound. So once he started tearing it up, I had nothing on the ground to scoop him up with. And when I don't have that, the robot's pretty much useless. Eventually, he pushed me onto a spot where the floor was kind of uneven, and I ended up being high-centered between the dustpan floor and the tail of Son of Gorgor. So basically leaving myself high-centered and unable to continue. Ironically, despite losing 2 fights and only winning 1, the fact that I had a bye and won in the winner's bracket actually gave Son of Gorgor 3rd place, which was kind of weird. Doesn't feel right, because I know other robots in that weight class won more fights than I did. But I guess that's just the way the bracket worked. Last but not least, we'll go to F13. Since I haven't published the upgrade video, I'll talk about him briefly as well. This robot has brand new drive motors. He's using the BaneBot's 26:1 gearboxes, the P60s, with the standard 550 motors on them. And I switched them over to some slightly wider Coulsons, but I think they're the same height. They're still 5-inch Coulsons. And then I remounted the machete using the actual holes that were in the handle grip, so the machete actually stuck out further from the robot. It wasn't actually something I needed the robot to have, but in some of the last few fights the machete had broken, and I was kind of thinking it may have been because my welding weakened the metal or something, and I just wanted to kind of take that out of the equation and bolt the weapon on instead. And F13 only weighed about 10 pounds going into this event, so Team X used their little tiny remote control car that they've used as a multi-bot at several other events, and we decided to enter it as F13 and F1.3, which just makes things even more confusing, and I'm sure I've screwed it up in this report already, having F13, F1.3, and F1/3. I'm confusing myself at this point. But our first opponent was the best possible opponent we could have gone up against. Slicey Dicey, a brand new Doge weight robot that is very similar to F-13 in its drive components and in its weapon. It has two independently actuated machetes, so while F-13 is very Neanderthal, just using brute force of the drivetrain to slam its machete around, this thing had like dissector style machetes on either side of it, which was awesome. And most importantly, both robots were crazy fast. In an 8-foot square arena, these things were just bouncing off the walls. It was just pure chaos for a while. Neither robot had a wedge or anything either, so we were both just kind of boxes slamming into each other with machetes flailing around in the process. I'm sure we put way too many scratches in the Lexan walls. Sorry, Kurt. But hey, you helped build Slicey Dicey. But anyway, yeah, we were just slamming into each other. F1.3, I think, was just getting tossed around between us. I told him before the fight that I apologize now, because I'm just going to hit your robot as much as the other robot, because I have no control with F-13. So it was just a lot of him slapping me around with machetes, me kind of being able to hit him sideways and push him into the wall. I also found that if you ran F-13 into the wall, front first, it would drive up the wall a little bit before bouncing back down, so it got some airtime in this fight of its own accord. The rest of the fight was just pure chaos, just us slamming into each other. I had so much fun in this match. It was everything I wanted this upgrade to F-13 to be, though it did kind of prove to myself that it's maybe a little too much. It's just way too fast for an arena that small to have any control, and I don't have any fancy stuff going on my radio where I can dial back the acceleration or anything. Probably just not good enough driver to have any sense of subtlety with this bot, though even in testing I found that it just had no subtlety. It would just go 0 to 60 no matter what. I did find after this fight that my motors were really toasty. I could actually feel the heat from the gearbox going through the screws, which is odd. I think it was the heat from the motor transferring through the gearbox into the screws, because I double-checked. The gearboxes were perfectly lubricated, so it wasn't like they were running dry or anything. I also found my battery was quite toasty after this as well, so these new motors are definitely pulling a little more current than the old drill motors were. Next up, our little multi-bot team was up against Sonic the Hedgehog. And this is not a fight that I'm really capable of doing well in. F-13 doesn't have any kind of wedge or anything, so all I could do is slap the machete around blindly at Sonic, and he was just able to get under me pretty consistently, throwing me around the box. I did a pretty good job throwing myself around the box too. At some point I was just giving up a little bit. Not really giving up, but basically enjoying using him as a ramp and launching F-13 around. I kind of reverted to standard Thwackbot methodology of just spinning in place and trying to smack him with the side of the machete, which of course doesn't really do any damage. Granted, I don't think chopping the machete overhead does much damage 99.9% of the time anyway, but he was able to pretty consistently slam me around the arena. I did at one point do my spin move and accidentally catch F1.3 and send it flying across the arena, which was awesome. Then at some point, Sonic the Hedgehog gets me over kind of near the side of the arena, and a nice little plume of smoke starts coming off of the motor of F-13. And at the time, I think a lot of us were fearing the worst, that this was a LiPo fire, and especially after noticing that the LiPo was toasty after the last match, I was, needless to say, a little bit concerned. So I got the robot outside, got it cracked open, and found that the battery looked fine, the speed controllers looked fine, which I knew they were because these are Victor 883s and they smoke pink, and it wasn't pink smoke, so I knew I was okay in that respect. But I did find that the one side of drive that smoke was coming out of was completely seized up. I did break down the motor, and it is just a little toasty. It is kind of burnt. I don't know how well this picks up on camera. There's definitely some charring going on inside of those windings. This was completely seized. Once I got the motor off the gearbox, I couldn't turn the shaft without taking pliers and putting a ton of pressure to it. And what I think ended up happening is that I hadn't properly heat shrunk the leads going into the motor, and the motor was very close to the speed controller. And I think two leads touched between the speed controller and the motor and just drove a short through that motor and fried it. Fortunately, it didn't fry the speed controller, which was what I was really worried was going to happen. So fortunately, I did have a spare motor. It took me a while to get the pinion off the motor because I didn't have a gear puller or anything with me. And fortunately, I had my little drill press vise that I always bring to events. And I was able to press the new pinion on, get the gearbox reassembled. That's when I was able to note that the gearbox was still lubricated like it should be. Got F13 ready to go for its next fight against Mad Cow Disease. F13 hadn't had to fight Mad Cow Disease before, and I wasn't really too excited about this. I still remember what happened when I fought a vertical spinner at ABC. It still has scars from that, and this was about what I was expecting. Mad Cow Disease just threw F13 around. Once again, because I don't have a wedge, all I could really hope to do was get on his flat sides that don't have a weapon and basically push him around. But that just wasn't happening. At one point I did launch F1.3 into his weapon. Sorry. That sent the battery spilling all over the place. I think I ended up doing more damage inadvertently to F1.3. But once my little helper bot was out of the fight, I was just at the mercy of Mad Cow. He was able to hit me quite a bit. He completely shredded the mounts that are holding the machete on, so the machete was going off at an angle. The machete itself was bent as well, but those attachment points that I actually didn't bring spares of were just totally shredded. And then as the fight went on, I started to notice that the top plate of F13 was popping up a little bit. The hinge that holds it on the one side had basically come loose. It was my front edge of the robot, and Mad Cow, I guess, just ripped all the screw heads off of the hinge on that side, and then it was really just two little screws in the back holding the top plate on, and I really didn't want him to just shred the insides of this bot. So I tapped out while still fully functional just to save myself from a worse fate. And I should mention that the doge weights in this event were round robin, so every bot fought every bot. And by this point, the winners had basically been decided. I needed a lot of time to get into F13 and fix things and get it ready to run again, because I wasn't going to run it without trying to get the top armor back down a little better. And charge the batteries too, because I didn't really have time to do that. So the winners of the doge weight bracket had been announced hours and hours before. Trophies had been handed out. Driver Mad Cow had gone home way before I ever got in my final match of the day against Construction Ahead, which is a box with a GoPro and some metal spikes on it. And F13 was in very sad states for this fight. The machete was basically at a 45-degree angle to the rest of the robot, and they didn't have my helper bot because they were in the Antweight finals, and I didn't want to bug them for my stupid last fight with the stakes of who gets 4th place. So I basically didn't do a whole lot in this fight. I kind of wandered aimlessly around the arena. I was trying to use the black bot action more, but with the bent machete, it was just kind of awkward to line up any shot. At some point, Construction Ahead stopped working, and I backed off, but he did come back to life, and we continued fighting. At some points, it seemed like F13 was also cutting out. I did install a status light on this version, so I could tell when the robot is on, but depending on which way the robot's facing, I can't always see it. And since F13 could be at a whole number of different positions, it's really hard to place the light, a spot where it's universally visible. So I don't know for sure if it was actually losing power or if something else was going on. But this fight was just kind of limping along just to get in my last fight of the day with this bot. At one point I did manage also to knock Construction Ahead up so that his wheels were off the ground. He was against the rail, but I did knock him back down so he could continue fighting for whatever that was worth. And F13 was able to take the fight by judge's decision and scored 4th place for the day out of 5 robots. I know I've been a bit of a broken record about the too many robots for one event thing. I probably should have clarified this before I started the whole report. It was really just because I wanted to help Jacob out with this event. At first, he didn't have a whole lot of robots attending, so I was trying to kind of boost the numbers up a little bit. Maybe, hopefully, people joined because they saw that there was a more significant number of robots going. So I don't really regret the reason why I brought 4 robots, but for a one-day event, it just was pushing myself way, way further than I was capable. A one-man team, yeah, it just really wore me out. And despite all the chaos, I did manage to bring home a little bit of hardware from this event. 2 on either sides are the 3rd place trophies. They're actually opposite the robots that they belong to, if you could read the plaque, but there's the one on the left is for Son of Gorgor taking 3rd place, the one on the right is for F1/3 taking 3rd place. Really cool trophies, 3D printed base and a laser cut acrylic and engraved purple acrylic for the rest of the display. So they're really cool looking trophies, I have to say. And the one in the middle there is the Fire Award, which was basically the voted on coolest robot, I guess, is what it basically came down to. It was an audience and competitor vote, and I think maybe some other people might have gotten a vote in there as well. But that was given to Son of Gorgor, which I was really happy about. Like I said, I love that robot. I had so much fun building and competing with it, so I'm glad other people enjoyed watching it. So definitely want to say thank you to Jacob and his crew at Florida Polytechnic for putting on the event. It was their first time ever running an event, and all things considered, it ran pretty darn smoothly from my perspective. Obviously, there's growing pains when you're first putting on an event. That's true of pretty much anybody. So for a first event, it was very, very successful, I think. A pretty good turnout overall. I put 4 robots in because there weren't many going, but we ended up with probably 30-something robots, I think. So it was a pretty full day of fights. Also, definitely thank you to Kurt and Kurtrox for bringing out the arena and taking a break from building a battle bot to do so. And from there, basically, what's next? I don't know. Usually when I'm doing one of these event reports, there's a next event that I'm ready for, or getting ready for, or have in mind. And right now, pretty much most of the event organizers in the state are going to BattleBots, doing the big heavyweight robot thing. So nobody's really announced anything coming up. I know Kurt had mentioned the idea of doing another robot sometime, maybe in the summer, which hopefully I'll be able to make, because that would be a lot of fun. It always is. But yeah, I might actually have a bit of a lull in my robot building schedule, which of course I'm going to fill with stupid, ambitious projects that I shouldn't really be undertaking, but I am because I want to. But as far as these robots go, F1/3, I think it had its run. I think I'm going to retire it. I may go back on those works at some point if I need to rebuild it quickly to have something last minute, but I have other ideas for a 1-pound bot. I actually have a lot of ideas I want to do in the 1-pound division, and I basically need to clear out that space so I can have more fun in that weight class. Really stupid ideas that aren't going to be very competitive as far as I can imagine, but things that I want to do nevertheless. Son of Gorgor is going to get rebuilt. He had some extra weight, so I think I'm going to pick a little more robust material to make that feeder wedge out of, keep it from getting crumpled up underneath itself, maybe make a few other tweaks. Probably need to buy a couple other bodies so I have spares of those, because I actually don't at the moment, but definitely want to rebuild him and have more fun. Demon Spawn and F13, not sure what I'm doing with either of those robots. Demon Spawn, I feel like I get on here every time after an event and say that it has potential in my mind that it's never been able to achieve, and I feel like the iterations of the robot are actually becoming worse instead of better. I do want to continue on with it, but I think it does need a brand new, full-on redesign. May not be the best thing since I am going to throw away what little I've learned on this version, but it really just needs something different because what it's doing now isn't working for it. F13, I was really pumped before this event to have this be the last go with this chassis and to rebuild it into something, still the black bot, but something a little more better built, not just a UHMW tube. But after running it with these new motors in this arena, I really feel like it's overkill for what it is, and maybe if I'm gonna rebuild a 12-pounder, I need to maybe do something a little less crazy and something I could actually control, maybe something with an active weapon. The machete's fun, but I feel at this point I'm just putting marks in the Lexan and not really hitting the other bot all that much. So, I don't know. I haven't decided. This is almost definitely the last bout for F13 with this chassis because this thing is toast. And I honestly think I'm going to steal these drive motors for my next project in a different weight class, but we'll see. Like I said, I am working on another project. I am planning a 30-pound bot. Right now, if you can hear the 3D printer cranking away through this whole thing, I am actually doing a 3D print of the entire robot before I buy the parts and have things machined. So I'm going to be making a series on that, covering the prototyping phase, and then hopefully building the real thing. So I will have those videos coming up sometime in the nearish future, as well as the other 2 upgrade reports on Demon Spawn and F13. So I've got plenty of video content, even though I don't have a specific event to build for at the moment. So I think I've rambled on long enough. I will see you guys at the next event. Later.